Hello, everybody. It's Andrea. I know it's been a while. Part of it is just the sheer amount of work that came with the 1-2 punch of that amazing State of the Union, followed by the joint American and Israeli attack on Iran. I call them the Allies. I know it's an outdated term going back to World War II, but they are allied. They are allies in the fight against Iran. So the Allies' attack on Iran. It's been a lot of work at American Thinker keeping up with all the submissions we've gotten, although they finally seem to have slowed down, as readers might know, because I think I wrote 4 or 5 essays yesterday because we didn't have enough content. If you like to write, consider contributing. We have a submissions information on the site, and it'll tell you our requirements, length, and style. One of the things that makes American Thinker special is that we are, so far as I know, the only conservative publication that relies primarily on contributions from volunteers that then go through an editorial process. But that gives us a depth and breadth that's completely rare in the conservative blogosphere. It's one of the reasons I believe that Rush Limbaugh liked our show so much and called it Show Prep, because he got to see at our site ordinary Americans' opinions instead of the small core of professional. And by ordinary, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean not people who were news professionals or opinion professionals, but normal people living their lives out in the real world. So if you're one of those normal people, stop by the site, check out our submissions tab, and see what you think of it. So it's been busy. The other thing is that it's been so busy, I get analysis paralysis. There are so many things I want to cover. I can't decide what to do. I'm like someone standing in a very crowded store just circling around. I came in knowing what I wanted, but by now I'm completely overwhelmed. So what I did was I just picked a few topics, and I didn't do a lot of prep. I haven't clipped a lot of articles and done the beautiful, well, for me, the beautiful show prep with fancy ragged edges and everything. I enjoy doing that. It's also very time consuming, and I realized that I was getting overwhelmed just by the thought of that task. This will be sort of a riff show. I will see where it goes. I hope you enjoy the journey. I'm going to start with something that is fairly perennial for me. I've been writing about it for years, which is China. Our world has been divided between 2 major geopolitical concerns over the last many decades. One is China, because it is our main geopolitical rival. China would like to be the world's dominant country. If the years after World War II have been the American era, the Pax Americana, America setting the tone, America is the most powerful country in the world, China under Xi would like for it to be in that place. It has a huge population, although more on that in a minute. It has tremendous natural resources, although it's missing some important ones. More on that in a minute. It has a very educated population, but more on that in a minute. It has a lot of virtues. It has a huge army. It has a huge country. It has huge people. It has leaders, political leaders who are absolutely dedicated to success. For a while, it looked unstoppable, but things are stopping. And China has a lot of problems now, which have been capped for now. There may be more even by Trump's moves. One of the problems China has is that its one-child policy, which it implemented in the 70s and only ended, I believe, in the early 2000s. What happened was that China got scared of its growing population and thought we can't sustain that. It was part of the whole zero population movement. It implemented the one-child policy. Couples could only have one child. And what happened wasn't just that the population rapidly contracted I think, much more rapidly than they realized. But because China is a sexist culture, as most old cultures are, they got rid of all their girls. The interesting thing about women is they can't have more than one baby per year. Technically, they could have one baby every 9.5 months, but I think even the most prolific woman would find it hard to do that. And so even Irish twins, that expression goes to babies that are maybe 11 months apart. Men, one man can have a lot of children simultaneously. It's not how women work. When you have a culture that aborts or otherwise kills its female babies, you suddenly have a huge problem. You have a ton of excess men, you have a shrinking population, and you don't have enough women to offset that. So while China has still a huge population, it is in decline, like the rest of the first world. I would say China is in many ways first world, even though it has huge pockets of still poverty and rural backwardness, but it's mostly a first world country. So it's got a population problem that it doesn't want to admit. I've heard from people that it's lying about its numbers, that its population actually is substantially below 1 billion, even though it claims it's more. It has a problem of the economy being really flabby. One of the major problems was it did a huge building boom, and the building boom went bust. And that accounted for some immense proportion of the economy. It has not recovered from that. The other thing is that its manufacturing sector is weakening, and a lot of that has to do with Trump, his tariffs, and putting a focus on America. A lot of it also has to do with just changing consumer demands. Americans are, I think, tired of Chinese garbage. The stuff that comes from China is incredibly poorly made. Think of what you buy at Walmart and at Lowe's or Home Depot. If you go to Home Depot and buy a tool that's made in China, it will be broken in a month. And if you buy one that's made in America or Japan or South Korea, you will pay more and it will last longer. China also, it has an educated population. They can do math better than we can. They're more literate than we are. But China utterly stifles innovation, and that's part of the problem with its economy, because everything in its economy is basically just piggybacking off of other people. Even when it came up with that major AI advance, it turned out to be based on stolen proprietary technology. Nothing China does is original. It has a huge military, but the military is also a problem. It's got a few structural problems. One is the same garbage building and manufacturing things that come to Walmart, and I will say my home is filled with Chinese made things because for a long time that's all you could buy. Whether or not you wanted, if you bought a shirt, it was made in China, and a week later the seams started coming apart. That same level of commitment to manufacturing is also what's going into the weapons we see in the military. It's going into their uniforms. It's going into their ships and their tanks. So they've got a lot of stuff. It's not necessarily good stuff. That matters. I'll get back to that in a minute too. It's keeping internal. They're also worried about the military loyalty, and the Epoch Times wrote about that. I didn't save the link. I'm sorry. I read it. But basically, the feeling is that as China has all these problems of the housing market and the population decline and the weakening economy, the military is no longer seen as trustworthy. There have been in the past month several purges at the very upper ranks of the military that always indicates that a tyrannical government no longer trusts its own military. That's a weak government. A strong tyrannical government trusts its military to be subordinate to and in service to the military. That gets us to the overseas stuff. One of the huge advantages China has had overseas is its famous Belt and Road Initiative. This was an effort to provide outposts across the world in poorer countries, strategic poor countries, South America, Africa, Southern Europe. And the deal was China would go to these places and say, we will build you a port or an airfield or dams, and we'll do it cheap and you don't have to worry about it. There's no other way you can get this. And these poor countries jumped on it. A couple of things happened. One, they discovered it didn't create, in the short term, it didn't create immediate employment for any of their population because China brought in its own labor. Two, to the extent that they promised to pay over time for China, now they're in debt to China, which is not a position you want to be in. And three, same problem that you have in the Chinese military and at Walmart and at Lowe's and at all these other places. Everything China built is already decaying. They do a terrible, terrible job. This is typical for communism because people have no pride in their work and there's no reward for extra effort. The rewards come from being in with the government and graft and corruption. And a lot of stuff in China is done by slave labor, which is never going to be well done. Even in America, one of the ways the slaves pushed back against slavery was simply by doing a bad job. That whole notion of blacks as being lazy and shiftless came about in large part because this was the only power the slaves had, which was to drag their feet and go as slowly and as carelessly as they could get away with in a situation where they otherwise had no power. Same thing in the Chinese factories, same thing when you ship Chinese workers to some African or Latin American outpost. Very bad work quality. Now China has another problem, which is that Trump brilliantly, now it might not work, this plan might fall apart, but it is a brilliant plan, is destroying the foreign pillars of their strength. Started with, and I'm not just talking the tariffs, which affected the economy and his totally constantly writing them. It started with Venezuela. Venezuela provided about 13% of China's oil. China has no oil resources of its own. It's building a new coal factory every week. It has coal, and coal will get you a long way, but in the modern world, what you need is oil. It has no oil of its own, and when you suddenly lose about 13% of your oil and the most affordable oil, you have a problem. It gets this other oil from Russia and Saudi Arabia, but they charge a lot more. So this Venezuela oil was extremely important to China, and now it's gone. Another problem is that Venezuela was and you know what? I got it backwards. Iran gave 13% of its oil. Venezuela was 3 to 4%. I apologize. Strike everything I said about that 13 to 14%. And you guys who knew better are all sitting there going, she's wrong. She's wrong. What's she talking about? Yeah, I'm dyslexic. I'm wrong. Anyway, what Venezuela gave to China was a very strong, loyal outpost in Latin America. It gave about 3% of its oil, which is not negligible. And Maduro was a strong provider of badness to America. I know that sounds simplistic, but Maduro sent the gangbangers and the drug runners to America. This was part of undermining America. Maduro also provided Cuba with oil, and Cuba has always been an important communist outpost on America's doorstep. It was to the Soviet Union, and it is now to China. So these outposts, these access points to America are now gone. Trump has also forced Mexico to start addressing its cartel problem. And do remember that a lot of what the cartels were smuggling across the border is fentanyl. And the precursors to fentanyl came from China. So this was a form of war against the U.S. China's lost that too, more especially since Trump has effectively closed the border, which is decreasing the flow of Chinese nationals and drugs into America. So Trump has just sort of locked down Latin America, making it fairly impregnable to China. And then Iran, there's that 13% oil. Sorry about that. I got it so wrong. Anyway, suddenly Iran is not sending oil to China, and the backdoor routes have stopped. The policing on the high seas is stopping illegal oil shipments to China that came via circumnavigating the boycott imposed on Iranian oil exports. So China is very, very weakened right now, and you can see it in the passive way that China has responded both to the attack on Maduro and to the war in Venezuela. This is all good things. I have to say, I like the Chinese. I grew up in San Francisco. The majority minority in San Francisco, where I lived and where I went to school, it was all Chinese. I thought I was honorary Chinese. All my friends were Chinese. I went around saying Gung Hei Fa Choi with the best of them. My favorite non-home cooking food is Chinese food. Living in South Carolina, I constantly mourn its absence. Since I have family reasons now to visit Singapore, I can get Chinese food there, but it's Southern Chinese, and I like the Northern Chinese food that was in San Francisco. The Chinese who made it to the West are incredibly industrious people. They're except for the Chinatown gangs, they were law-abiding. The kids at my school, they were intellectual, academic, successful. Communism has destroyed a lot of that. I would love to see China forced to retreat in its borders. I don't want to see it destroyed. I don't want to see it turned into Mogadishu or Haiti, some wreckage of a country. What I would love to see is just China turn a bit inwards and focus on getting better, on being a free society, an innovative society, an honest society, and not a society that seeks to control the world. So I'm very pleased with how things in China are shaping up, both because of China's internal problems and because of Trump's actions. And again, my apologies about getting those oil statistics wrong. I'm imperfect. I was going to say sue me, but someone might take me up on that. Don't sue me. Next issue is the war in Iran itself. This was one of my analysis paralysis things. I am thrilled about this war at so many levels. One of the things that's thrilling, and it's actually the header image I used because it just struck me today. When I was growing up in the 70s, one of the things that they kept talking about was the neutron bomb. I have no idea what a neutron bomb really is or how it works, but what we were told back in the 70s is that a neutron bomb would leave all the buildings standing and kill all the people. And it was a rather terrifying thought. There would be a massive neutron bomb war, and every major city in the world would become a ghost town devoid of human beings. Talk about depopulation. What's interesting is what we've seen over the past slightly more than a week in Iran is kind of the reverse of that. Now, we know that if Iran got the nuclear bombs, and they're very close, or were very close, they would do something where they would level buildings and people without compunction. But because the allies, the US and Israel, are moral countries, what they want to do is destroy Iran's evil infrastructure. They want to destroy the political infrastructure, which is the mullahs and their entire cadre, and they want to destroy the IRGC, not the regular Iranian army, but the IRGC, which is it's like the SS of Iran, the Gestapo and SS of Iran, all rolled up into one. And their weapons are so exquisitely precise, and you can see this in the videos that go up on X, that they can target a bedroom, a car, a single building, a gas station. The precision with which these targeted strikes are happening is staggering. And as best they can, they are leaving the Iranian civilian population untouched. Because the Iranian civilians are victims of their government and victims of the IRGC, and they are desperate for liberty from these despots. We don't have to win their hearts and minds. Their hearts and minds are with us. And the last thing we want to do is kill them. Israel and Gaza tried very hard not to kill the civilians, but it didn't work. First of all, because the Hamas hid among the civilians to ensure their deaths, wanted them dead. But second of all, because those civilians have been marinated in Jew hatred for generations and embraced martyrdom, and nothing was going to make them. There were no hearts and minds to be won. But in Iran, it's very smart not to kill the civilian population. And we have warfare here that is wiping out the infrastructure without wiping out the people. And it is probably the most humane war ever fought in the history of warfare. It's also high time. This was a war that could no longer wait. This was the day before Hitler invaded Poland. This could not wait. Since 1979, you've seen this elsewhere. I won't go on at length because I won't say it as intelligently as others. But since 1979, Iran has been in open, freely stated, and active warfare against the United States. It's also been at war against Israel. There's a proximity thing here, and Israel, that teeny little nation in a sea of Islam, is seen as a grave offense to the mullahs. So they're certainly happy to destroy Israel, as one of the ayatollahs, the first one killed, maybe, said. Or maybe it was the second. Could it have been the third? Anyway, it's a one-bomb country. So yes, Israel is definitely interested in destroying the current Iranian system, but so is the U.S. Iran directly and indirectly has done everything it can to attack the U.S. The Marine barracks bombing in 1983 was just a start. Iran has fomented anti-American killings through proxies all over the world. It foments any kind of Islamic terrorism in the world. Iran somewhere is back there. It will ally itself with Sunnis if it needs to. It doesn't matter. It is fomenting an Islamic takeover. It is very confident that it will be the ultimate winner as against other Muslim sects. And one of the things that the left doesn't want to recognize about Iran is that Iran is an apocalyptic sect. Sunnis and other Shia are not, but Iran subscribes to the Twelver philosophy, which says that after Muhammad died, his son-in-law became the true leader, and he had with him 12 imams who were the perfect imams. 11 of them eventually died at the end of their natural lives, but the 12th was, there's a word for it, I forget what it was, but he was basically encapsulated, free of time and space, and he will return when the apocalypse comes and usher in a glorious new age of the caliphate, where the entire world is subordinate to the perfect Shia Islam that the mullahs practice. The important thing here is that while biblical believers, both Jews and Christians, accept that there will one day be an apocalypse, and they prepare for it. They prepare for it spiritually. Those who believe that they'll be left behind or worry that they'll be left behind have weapons and food and supplies for the end of days. They worry about it. They plan for it. They hope to be taken up by it or to benefit from it. The one thing they don't want to do is start it. They're not going to pull the trigger on that gun. The mullahs believe that it's their responsibility to pull the trigger on that gun. And that has made them more dangerous than any other Islamic sect in the world, bar none. And they are working on a nuclear weapon because the nuclear weapon is the trigger. And they have boasted, truthfully or not, that they have enough fissile material for 11 nuclear warheads. They just needed a week or two to get it to the final stage, and they needed a delivery system. The moment they have a delivery system, the world as we know it is over. Because unlike other nations, China, the Soviet Union, They're not religious. They're hard-headed. They live in this world. Mutually assured destruction would stop them. The mullahs get a nuclear weapon, and they're going to town because they can trigger that much longed for apocalypse. This was truly the last moment. A strike now or a strike never. A strike now saving the world from an Iranian apocalypse, or a strike never. And the apocalypse and the Iranians controlling the world, controlling world trade, blackmailing everyone with the threat of death, and quite probably lobbing one of those nuclear missiles at Israel. The fact that it would have killed millions of Muslims too would have been irrelevant to them. The apocalypse. So very, very happy about this war. It needed to be done. Trump made the right call. Bibi Netanyahu made the right call. The American and Israeli militaries are doing extraordinary things. And while it's incredibly sad that 7 members of the American military have died, I wish that were not so. From a larger historical perspective, when you consider the scale of this war, the fact that only 7 troops have died is fairly unbelievable. In the American Civil War, between the two sides, war and disease, I think it was roughly 600,000 troops died. In World War II, I think 460,000 troops never came home. And in this war, where we have wiped out the leadership, the level below the leadership, the IRGC command structure, the headquarters, the supply storage, weapons. We're destroying one launcher after the other. Midnight Hammer wiped out some of the nuclear areas. 7 deaths, each a tragedy. But what an amazingly small number in the grand scheme of things. So, this is a wonderful war. The Iranian mullah and IRGC, obviously they hate it. There's one other group that hates it. Now, who would that be? Who? Oh, I know who it is. The Democrats. The Democrats who up until recently, Iran bad. Get Iran. Get rid of the mullahs. Iran bad. Now that Trump is doing it, how can you do this? And we're going to lose this war. And it's a terrible war. And Pete Hegseth needs to be fired. And Trump is a pedophile. Did you know Trump's a pedophile? That is the Democrat response. It is an utterly shameful response. It is a disgusting and immoral response. But they are rallying to the cause of the mullahs. What's interesting is maybe they need to stop and think about who these mullahs are. For example, these mullahs probably are shooting at their own people, although by accident. I found a really interesting tweet by Matt Tardillo, who's former military. One of the things the Democrats are claiming to prove how evil Trump and Hegseth are is that they lobbed a weapon at a girls' school, killing over 150 girls. The fact that the girls' school was on or near an IRGC base didn't matter. This is how, this is the Israel template all over again. They target civilians. And of course, Iran embraced this narrative. But Matt Tardillo did a very interesting analysis. He looked at the video of the missile that landed in the school. And what he says, Iran alleged that it's an American Tomahawk cruise missile, this is all over the leftist media, and I see it on leftist Facebook pages I follow because you need to know what other people are saying. He says analysis of a newly released video tells a different story. And I clipped a lot of this. It was very technical and I didn't get it. But he talks about the fact that where the wing configuration is, he says if you look at the video, it cannot be a Tomahawk. And eventually, after this long analysis, he says, so what could have caused this? Simply put, GPS jamming of an Iranian KH-55. The USA and Israel were and continue to actively jam the Iranian airspace. If the KH-55 signal was jammed, this could result in an uncontrollable dive. Think of GPS jamming more like disorienting the missile. On 3/7, President Trump stated, "No, in my opinion, based on what I've seen, this was done by Iran." Today, I concur with the president. That sounds good. You'll never hear this from the Democrats. They need to have it that President Trump is killing babies. That's the Democrat narrative since the Vietnam War. And who are the mullahs? Well, we know they killed 30,000 of their own people because the people dared to stand up and protest against them. We know that the moment the war started, they started firing rockets everywhere, and indiscriminately. Originally, it was at American military bases, but now they're just firing and they're killing civilians in the Gulf regions. And of course, they're trying to kill Israeli civilians. So they have no care for human life. They just want to kill, and it's created a dynamic nobody ever thought they'd see, which is that Israel is now allied with the Muslim Gulf states. It is an expansion of the Abraham Accords. It's amazing. But also, I want to talk about who the mullahs are. And I thought this really was a very good summary. And it comes from Liza Rosen. I went with it because I've seen the same information in other sources. So I believe it is accurate. I've seen it in things from Amnesty International, from testimony of people released from and Amnesty International is no friend to America. A testimony from people released from Iranian prisons. It's out there, so I'm accepting it as true. And Liza Rosen's tweet opens by saying, "It is not gay if the prisoners bleed and faint from the pain." Iran's Ayatollah issued a ruling obliging regime agents to rape male prisoners and inflict unbearable pain to avoid homosexuality charges. I'm going to interject here that homosexuality is rife in the Muslim world. They have no access to women, the young men. The way it's seen, there are a bunch of things going on. One is, if it's done with young boys, it's not gay, because boys are not men, and if you're not doing it with a man, and you especially see that in Afghanistan, which is what so disgusted the American troops, and they were not allowed to do anything about it. The other thing is that if you are doing it to someone, if you're the, pardon my language, penetrating person in the same-sex sex, then you're not gay. You're only gay if you are on the receiving end. If it's sort of consensual, if you're on the receiving end and you want it, well, you're gay and maybe you'll be hanged later. But this is about using it as a form of torture. So anyway, inflict unbearable pain to avoid homosexuality charges. The ruling requires rape by several male agents to ensure the victim does not enjoy it, bleeds, and suffers. In 2009, after the disputed election amid reports of prison rape and torture, Ayatollah Mohammad Taqi Mesbah Yazdi ordered the IRGC and morality police to rape female prisoners for pain, trauma, and discipline. Laws instructed agents to satisfy themselves in Allah vaginally or anally, preferably without witnesses, after washing and prayer rituals. For male prisoners, rape is permissible, dedicated to Allah, and performed with other agents who ensure no enjoyment to avoid sin. It must cause maximum pain, often leading to severe injury or death. These practices are common in Iran's prisons, including Kharizak and Evin, per reports and testimonies. Now, apologists will say, oh, they're not doing it anymore, but of course they're doing it. This is how they operate. I mean, look at what Hamas, which is an Iranian proxy, did to the women before they slaughtered them in Israel on October 7. They raped and raped and raped and literally raped them to death. Incidentally, it's not only Muslims. Russians did that too during World War II. I had a German neighbor, since passed away, back when I was living in California, and lovely woman, married a Jewish man after the war, lovely man, and she said what the Russians did was unspeakable. She and her sisters were left alone. The parents were gone, and they were in the path of the Russian army. You don't want to be in the path of the Russian army. Unless you think that Liz Rosen is just sort of exaggerating, Dr. Malouf, who looks at the Islamic world, he has a very good Twitter X feed, quotes an female Islamic scholar. And this is from Memory TV. They caught this. Allah allows Muslim men to rape non-Muslim women to humiliate them. If we fight infidels, we can take their women as sex slaves and rape them. Well, duh. That's exactly what Muhammad said. That's what's been going on since Muhammad's time, unstoppingly, wherever jihad goes. And it's the norm in Iran. So these are the people that the Democrats, the party of women, the party of gays, these are the people that they're weeping over and really wish would remain in power for no other reason than to spite Trump. However, there are a couple, at least, of very prominent, reasonable Democrats, and the people I'm thinking of are Bill Maher and John Fetterman. And both of them have supported what's going on in Iran. Both of them have said, let's be honest, the mullahs are incredibly dangerous. They're evil, totalitarian, murderous people who are a blight on the world and who are the source of most of the world's Islamic terror. If they were gone, the world would be an infinitely more peaceful place. Well, kudos to them. That is a kind of moral honesty that one can really appreciate. And yet there's still diehard Democrats. There's still John Fetterman, who goes on Ben Shapiro and goes on Fox News and talks about supporting the and fighting the mullahs and everything, still votes actually 95% with the Democrats. And when push comes to shove, Bill Maher will always say that Republicans are evil and all this. I finally figured out what they remind me of, because I often think in analogy. I was there at the beginning of AIDS. And when I say I was there, I was really there. In 1982, was it? No, 1981, the summer of 1981, I got a job working at Mount Zion Hospital in San Francisco, which is now Mount Zion UCSF. I worked as a secretary for two virologists. Their secretary was going on maternity leave, so the timing was perfect. I needed a job. They needed a secretary. And my mother had made sure I graduated from junior high school knowing how to type, because she said, as long as you can type, you will always have a good job and you will never end up as a saleswoman in the basement of Macy's, which was her ultimate threat of complete collapse. It was an interesting job. Their previous secretary was a young woman who they could not fire for racial reasons, and she hadn't done jack squat for them. And I helped them get out 3 papers over the course of the summer I was there. Each of those papers was about a sudden increase in really bizarre diseases that were not normally seen amongst, that just really were never seen. And suddenly they were showing up in gay men. There were 2 I remember, when pneumocystis carinii pneumonia and Kaposi sarcoma, a type of cancer. So there were all these bizarre diseases and horrible giardia, which is when you drink water with bacteria. For most people, it's nasty and you get the runs and you take an antibiotic. But gay men were getting horrifically ill. This is 1981. They saw all these symptoms. It took another 2 years, 3 years, before they realized that these weren't standalone problems. They were part of the umbrella disease of acquired immune deficiency syndrome. They couldn't put it together. And when I look at people like Bill Maher and John Fetterman, they see symptoms. They see Democrats weeping over the murderous mullahs dying. They see the problems of the open border, but they're incapable of putting together the fact that everything is a problem of the Islamo-Marxist coalition to which they still belong. They still believe not in the Islamo part, but in the Marxist part. They're leftists. They still believe more government can solve these problems. Less individual liberty can make it better. Pretending that the world is our friend, except maybe for certain governments, they still believe, and they haven't recognized that the Marxism is the equivalent of acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And what's happening in Iran, what's happening in other places around the world, the fentanyl problems, the open border, that those are all, they aren't isolated problems. They are all sub-diseases of the Marxist illness. I hope one day they wake up. They're good advocates for what they believe in, and you have to admire their moral courage, at least in pointing out the symptoms they see. Finally, this is a random one, and it just struck me. It was about, I live in the Charleston region, and it was in our local media about a young man who was arrested for robbing a hotel room and was caught with all sorts of drugs. So let me read the story to you. It's from the local news. 23-year-old man arrested on drug trafficking and gun charges after hotel burglary probe. And there's a picture of him. His right eye, I don't know if it's missing or swollen shut. He looks awful. Nobody looks good in mugshots. But here's the story. A man was arrested late Monday night on multiple gun and drug charges after police conducted a burglary investigation on Ashley Phosphate Road, according to the North Charleston Police Department. I'll interject that Ashley Phosphate Road is a major thoroughfare, not in the historical part of North Charleston, which is an area that goes back to colonial times, but in the more modern part. And parts of North Charleston have clean industry and are very upscale, and parts of North Charleston are abysmally poor and riven with drugs and crime. And this is his crime occurred right at a freeway on-ramp in the part of North Charleston that's getting pretty gnarly. I'll go on reading. Calestro Bernard Frazier, a 23-year-old, was arrested and charged with possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime, trafficking fentanyl, 14 grams or more, distribution of methamphetamine, and possession of Schedule 1 and 2 narcotics. 23-year-old young man. He should be in the prime of his life. He should be ambitious. He should be working hard. He should be putting aside money. He might be married. Maybe he's starting a family. That is the promise. And yet this is his life. And the fact is he comes from a community where so many people, that is their life. And this being South Carolina, most of these people are Black, although there are also a lot of Hispanics mixed in. And I have to tell you, I find it incomprehensible that in a world where you don't have to live this way, where you can make choices, this is the life they choose. In Europe, you could not rise above your class. It was a class society. There's that great line from My Fair Lady: an Englishman's way of speaking absolutely classifies him. As soon as he starts speaking or something, he makes some other Englishmen despise him. You couldn't rise up. In fact, I'm rereading a novel by one of my favorite writers, D.E. Stevenson. She wrote it right after World War II, and it's about a young woman, an independent thinker who is an author. She moves to a small village, and she ends up falling in love with a young man who went off to war and through his industry and brilliance rose up to the officers' ranks instead of just being an enlisted man in a class society. And he became a cultured and sophisticated man, and he no longer has a place in his own town. His own mother doesn't know what to do with him and is not even proud of him. She's troubled by him. His former friends reject him. He has become classless. And these two, the book ends with them going off like to a tea plantation or something. You have to go to the colonies because you cannot stay in England. It's too stratified. You cannot rise out of your class. I had a professor at UC Berkeley who said one of the reasons that he was a good professor, the only one, that the English economy flatlined, whereas the American Industrial Revolution continued and grew, was that the class system meant that people, once they achieved a certain level of material comfort, just stopped. There was no value in striving harder and doing more because you could not rise above your class. But in America, you can. I live in a community, a nice community, an upscale community. I'm very blessed. I worked hard to get here. It didn't fall in my lap. And I'd say 30% of the residents are Black in my community. They also live in an upscale community. Nothing blocked them. There were no red lines. There was no Jim Crow. Through their efforts, their creativity, their hard work, they and I share the same neighborhood. We like each other. It's a lovely neighborhood. So what is holding these people back? Well, part of it is that's their culture. If you grow up in a culture of crime, you tend to be a criminal, but it doesn't have to be this way. One of the things the Democrats do, though, is that they ensure that it has to be this way because they brainwash these people and they tell them you cannot do better. They have created a class system without a class system. There is no class system, but they've created a false reality where young men like this believe that school is meaningless, that learning is nothing, that the only benefit comes from being the bigger, harder, faster, stronger, meaner criminal. And this is an unutterable tragedy. It is the loss of a generation of mind and energy and everything. And when I see stories like this, I truly want to cry. And I totally blame the Democrats for this because they've created not even a glass ceiling, a concrete ceiling by denying these men and women the promise of America. It's so sad. Somehow we have to do better. If the SAVE Act is passed, I think that will spell the end of the Democrat Party, and a lot of the evils in the world, if Trump is successful, will be gone. Iran and Islamic terrorism will be gone. China's threat to the free world will be constrained. And at home, the Democrats' reign of open borders and population replacement and crime and drugs and anti-family and sexual abnormality will be weakened to the point of disappearing. On that, I hope, optimistic note, I will say goodbye and thank you very much for listening and for your patience in waiting for me to get off my toches, stop the analysis paralysis, and do another podcast.